In this video, we're going to take a look at the new features in EventSentry version 5.2 compared to the previous release of version 5.1. And let's dive right in. The first new feature is in the AD monitor component, where we can now check whether the password of an Active Directory user has been compromised. You can enable this feature here on the AD monitor dialog in the management console. And as you can see here, the checks are done by the haveibeenpawned.com website. This service is free. There's no subscription required. And if your host does not have an internet connection, but you still want to check for compromised passwords, you can download their password database, which is big, about 30 gigs, through a special script that they publish on their GitHub page that you can then specify here. And how can you see all this? There's a couple of ways you can get at this information. There's the AD statistics tab that has been updated in 5.2. We can see here there's a password compromised indicator now. So if you click that, then we immediately go to the features AD monitor users page that shows us the users where the password has been compromised. And you can also use the hash here to determine if two or more users are sharing the same password. So if you have users that don't take security very seriously and they're just writing down passwords or sharing the same passwords, then you can identify that easily right here. We also added additional local inventory information from monitored hosts. We can now collect all local file shares that are present on a monitored host, as well as all local user accounts and all local group accounts. If you go to features, you can now see local shares present there. You can see users that now has a local users inventory. And if you go to groups, the local groups inventory. In the past, we've only been able to show changes that were made to the local groups or user accounts, but now you can actually review the inventory. So for example, if you click on local shares here, then we can see all shares that exist network-wide on all the monitored hosts. A better view at it is through the host inventory. If you go to the host inventory of a monitored host, we now have a new tab here called local, and this will show you at a glance all local groups, all local users, and all local shares. For example, here we have administrator local groups. You can click that. You can see all the members of that group. You can see all the local users and all the local shares. You can click that information here as well, click the path, and then see more information about that file share. Another new feature is the ability to manage sysmon. Sysmon is a component of the sysinternal suite that's freely available on the internet, developed by Microsoft. And if you're not familiar with sysmon, I'd recommend that you take a quick peek at the website. But in essence, sysmon supercharges the built-in Windows auditing and provides some additional capabilities that are not natively available through Microsoft Windows security auditing. Now, while sysmon is very powerful, one of its downsides has always been the lack of management features available with sysmon, meaning that you normally have to manually install sysmon on each endpoint, since it also installs a driver in the backend, and you also have to manually manage the configuration. However, with 5.2, we are easing that pain a bit and giving you the ability to manage your entire sysinternal's sysmon installation through EventSentry. And you can do that with a new security and compliance feature called sysmon. So you create a new package, you add the sysmon object to it, and there you go. You have the ability to now manage sysmon, meaning you can install it, you can uninstall it. It can also keep the configuration updated with EventSentry. You can use a predefined configuration file that we provide, or you can use your own. And from that point on, EventSentry will make sure that sysmon is either installed, and if they do release a new version, that EventSentry will update, or can, if you've enabled that functionality, update sysmon to the latest version. Process tracking that is part of the security and compliance functionality in EventSentry has also received a few updates. The first one is subtle. We now show the caller process of a process. In the past, previously we only showed the actual caller process PID, so you had to kind of do some manual digging there to get to the actual process name. But now in process tracking we have two new columns, the creator path and the creator file. So that of course is the caller process of the actual process that was being tracked. Another improvement is a new checkbox here called spoof detection. And what that does is we inventory system processes in the Windows, in the %windir% directory. So normally that's the C Windows directory. And we inventory all executables in that directory and subdirectories with some exclusions. And if we detect that a process runs outside of this directory, but using a name that is a internal Windows name, for example, notepad.exe, calc.exe, ping.exe, which is often a technique that malware uses, then we will flag this process as an anomaly. And you can then further decide what to do with this if you want to show this on a dashboard, send an email, or something else. Another enhancement in the process management, process monitoring area of EventSentry is the process activity page. Now that page falls into the same footsteps as the IP activity and the user activity pages. Those are also pages that kind of bring information or tie information from multiple areas in EventSentry into a single page to make it a little bit easier to do research on an IP address or on a user to see all of its activity that is available rather than having to jump through 4 or 5 different pages. And the process activity page, again, does a similar thing. Just by navigating there, you can see recent processes divided between user and core system processes, and then also see the most active processes as of recently. But a really exciting feature is to search for a specific process. For example, I recently launched a calculator app through a variety of different parent applications. And I'm going to just type in calc.exe right here. You'll see that calc.exe was found. There's no sysmon information. This process didn't open up any network connection. It doesn't match any services. It doesn't listen for any incoming network connections. But these are all things you would see. You can see that the only system it was found at was this EventSentry machine, the machine I'm on right now. But the exciting thing is if you click the process right here, you can see which process called this process. So calc.exe here was launched by cmd.exe, which also launched other processes. And if you click cmd.exe, then you can see which process actually launched cmd.exe, and that's correct. I was in Notepad and I launched the command line cmd.exe through Notepad. And if you click Notepad again, then you can see that Notepad itself was launched through Explorer, so just through the Start menu. But let's take a look at another example of how this page can be useful. I have a mail server running somewhere here, so all I know is that the text mail is part of the process of the service. So I'm just going to put in mail here, and it immediately identifies, okay, there's a running process on this machine called mail server. It's listening for 4 incoming network connections on 4 different ports, and also identifies the actual service that's associated with that process. So those are all things you would normally have to go through several features in EventSentry, but that feature scouts the entire EventSentry database and finds all the relevant information here in one single pane. Hardware inventory has been enhanced, which now includes an inventory of all attached keyboards. That could be a USB or a Bluetooth keyboard. And there are 2 things you get from that. The first one is, of course, the keyboard will now show up in the host inventory page. So, for example, here we have a standard PS2 keyboard attached to this host. And it will also issue an alert when a previously unseen keyboard has been attached to a monitored host. So that is particularly useful for public locations, for example, like a front desk or hospitals, where USB ports are exposed and where intruders could potentially plug in a malicious USB device that emulates a keyboard, for example. In EventSentry version 5.1, we had introduced a new feature called anomaly detection, which works with event log filters to detect potentially suspicious behavior. For example, new processes being launched that had previously been unseen, users logging on to hosts they usually don't log on to. And in 5.2, we enhanced that capability a little bit with the option to now filter these anomalies on the collector. So in 5.1, for example, if a new process is seen on host A and marked as an anomaly, then if that same process is seen on host C a day later, it will be marked as an anomaly again. So there are potential duplicate false alerts. And now in 5.2, same location here under anomaly, you now have the option to filter on the collector. So if you check that box, then the collector will suppress a second anomaly alert and not mark it as an anomaly. And since we're in an event log filter right here, we also introduced threat scoring. So with threat scoring, you can now assign a potential threat score to any event log activity, such as a process being launched. So you can do this by clicking any filter here and going to advanced, and you have a threat score. And you can set this threat score to any number, for example, 40. And here we have another filter that detects if the calculator is not launched by Explorer. Again, you can go into advanced, assign this a threat score, and let's just say this is a higher one. We'll set it to 70. And what does that do? Well, you can now, once you have threat scores defined, you can go to the global options, where we now added the security tab. So we moved some options over here into the security area, and you can define threat thresholds. So you can now say, well, if the threat scoring exceeds a set threshold in a certain amount of time, so for example here, if the threat score of 100 is met or exceeded within 120 seconds to minutes, then EventSentry will log event 10660 to the event log, indicating that threats have been detected, that the threat score has been reached, and will also list the first 10 event log filters that contributed, that are part of this threat score. On the collector side, the collector client on the agent can now utilize port knocking. So if you have a firewall that supports port knocking, you can go to the advanced settings here, enable this feature, specify the IP address or hostname of your firewall that will ultimately require port knocking, specify the ports, and the collector client will connect to these ports prior to attempting a connection with the collector. We also added collector support for process actions. So if you need to trigger an action on the actual collector from an agent, so you want to run a process not on the agent when an event occurs, but run it on the collector, then you can do that now. That'd be useful, for example, if you have a central process that sends SMS messages or other things. In the web reports, we added two-factor email authentication, so you can now require that prior to logging in to the web reports. We updated some tiles and added new tiles. For example, here I created the version 5.2 dashboard that shows a couple of those improvements. The dashboard manager, by the way, has been improved in 5.2 as well. It makes it a little bit easier now to manage dashboards, sort dashboards, for example. The acknowledge tile, which is becoming increasingly important for managing alerts, has been improved. You can now specify a query on that tile to only see a subset, to only query for a subset of event information. So you have multiple areas that require acknowledgement, for example, acknowledging new processes, acknowledging new logons, and similar things. You can now group those into separate tiles and separate dashboards, for example. Another neat feature is the NetFlow top connections tile. So that is new and now shows flow data between your top connections in a visual manner. And this can be changed and configured to show either information from host names, IP addresses, ports, cities, states, and countries. You can also, of course, customize these tiles for a larger display. So for example, we can increase the height here to 600, and that will make that tile look a little bit bigger and show more details. You can also click on the data to then get redirected to the NetFlow page and examine the traffic further. In 5.2, you can also run the web reports as a standalone application if you're using Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge. I'm not sure if you noticed in the earlier parts of the video, but you'll notice here that all the information I'm showing here actually is missing a title bar and is showing the EventSentry logo on the bottom, and looks like an actual Windows application, almost looks like the management console. I'm going to close that here real quick. And that is because this has been installed as a web application. And you can do this by clicking a little icon that appears here if you don't have that application installed yet. And again, that works on Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge. If you use the EventSentry utility, then that has been improved as well. If you right-click that utility here, there's two new options here. One is called Activity, one is Process Service. The Process Service one is pretty simple actually. You can simply type in a process name and you'll have the ability to essentially terminate that process. You can simply click it here and click the kill button, or you can also see any services that are matching that name as well. And we also added the activity dialog. So that will actually show you any activity that's happening on that system right now to give you a brief overview, okay, what's happening right now without having to open up Task Manager, security event log, and so forth. So it'll show you processes starting and stopping, processes that are red are unsigned. You can see the command line. You can also see system changes that are happening right now. For example, system files being changed, services being added, removed, scheduled tasks. And you can also see all active processes listing for incoming network connections, for example, the HTML server that we already looked at earlier. So this is great for troubleshooting, or if something suspicious is happening, they can simply bring up this activity dialog and get some information there. Now, of course, there have been other improvements made in EventSentry throughout the management console, agents, and web reports, but what I've covered here in this video is the most important new functionality that was added to EventSentry 5.2. Thanks for watching.